also think, from a kind of socio-political standpoint, thinking about AI as a technology is a mistake. You need to be thinking about AI, a tectonic shift in every aspect, in healthcare, in feeding people who don't have enough to eat, in finding cures for diseases, distributing wealth more equitably. I mean, you name it, there's a place for it in all of that. And if you think about it as a technology, as this thing over there, like the internet, like you could decide not to use a computer. You could decide to never go online, and you could, live a very normal, happy life. You could decide not to have a mobile phone. But AI is much, much more than a technology.
Welcome to another episode of Tools, Talents, and Techniques. I'm your host, Dustin Sutton, and today I have a very special guest. And one of the things I'm so excited about this is because here's a gentleman, a professional who has been working on efficiency and using AI, all the things that I love, that I try to do in my life and try to make things easier and better. And he's doing it for businesses and has a great background. So I am honored to welcome to the show, Mr. Eric Goldman. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Dustin. I'm excited.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun. So before we jump in, could you give a quick thumbnail on who you are and what it is you do? And we'll dive into all the details, but just a quick brief intro.
Sure. So for the last 15 years, I've been working with small businesses to help them scale effectively and efficiently. Typically, they get to that point in their growth where they're great technicians, but they're lousy business people. And that's where I come in and bring in my team and help them out. And most recently, probably for the last year or so, we've been using a lot of AI to help them do that. So that's what I do in a nutshell.
All right. And so a lot of things that when you talk about the business and business strategy and doing things before AI, there's a lot of techniques that people use, strategies, and it seems like with all these tools and what AI is able to do, it's just a huge igniter. It just does so much. So before we get into the end, you're also a published author. You have a couple of books, so we're going to get into that as well. But let's go back to the beginning. Let's start like the beginning of your journey. Where are you originally from?
I was born and raised in San Francisco.
All right. How was that? Let's give you a nice. So what did you do growing up? Like, what did you aspire to be?
Okay. So you want the nitty gritty, the real story.
I mean, whatever you're comfortable with sharing. Because here's the thing: one of the things that I realize in talking about people's career journeys and what they do, it's usually a windy path. And there's usually like, oh, well, I was into math or I was into science and that led me to this or that. So I paint a picture of like what young Eric Goldman was doing in the Bay Area.
So for you Bay Areans, I cheated a little bit when I said that I was born and raised in San Francisco. Well, I was born in the city, actually, at Mount Zion Hospital, but lived in Kensington, which is kind of North Berkeley Hills, until I was in middle school. And I don't know that there was too much remarkable about me at that point. I rode my bike around the corner. There was a cul-de-sac. We had lots of friends. We played kickball. Back then, there was no internet. TV had 7 channels. So it was basically, get home before dark. And then
Was there anything that you like leaned towards as far as like, not necessarily like sports or anything, but did you have affinity for math or science? Like what did young Eric think he was going to do when he grew up?
I was a pretty boring kid. I wish I had something more exciting to say, that I was building rockets and model airplanes, but nothing too crazy at all.
Did you know what you wanted to do when you got older? Was it a fireman or lawyer, doctor?
I didn't have a clue. Both of my parents are in the mental health care profession, and they're
Got
actually
it.
still alive. They're in their early 90s. My dad was trained as a psychiatrist, but spent the majority of his career in managed mental health care. So working for large insurance companies, handling the medical side of mental health care. And my mom is the psychologist and was a professor at San Francisco State for about 30 years. So I grew up in a home with lots of doctors and medical books and lots of interest in what you were thinking and feeling all the time, which was interesting. The pro is, my parents are amazing and they had a lot of empathy. The downside of that is, sometimes a banana is just a banana. And that was a hard one.
Yeah.
So
it's nice to hear that they had empathy, and especially, and I'm not using this term in a pejorative sense, but because it really resonates with me. But when you're kind of rudderless and you don't know what you want to do, it's nice to have people that can actually, empathize with that and, let you understand that you're gonna figure it out. So when you went to school, and did you have a specific major or anything that you were leaning towards professionally?
Jumping up to college.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sure. Okay, so I'll fill in the little blank there. Middle school, we moved back east to Massachusetts. Lived in Wellesley for a couple of years. We moved back there for my dad because he was the commissioner of mental health for the state. The governor didn't get reelected, so we moved back to California and then moved into the city proper. And I went to junior high in the city, high school. I went to a pretty interesting school called Urban, which it was a private school, but very alternative. So it was nice, in high school, kind of not knowing who I was and who I wanted to be. There was a lot of room for growth and discovery, I would say. And when I finished up there, I went to San Francisco State to where my mom was teaching. And initially I studied psychology. So I thought at that point that I did want to do something similar to what my parents did, maybe be a therapist or school psychologist, mostly working with kids. That was my primary interest. But before I graduated from college, I was also taking business classes too. I went to get a summer job at Macy's in downtown San Francisco. And because I had a bunch of retail experience, they asked me if I wanted to take their junior executive program and be a part of that. So I said, what the hell, might as well. So all of a sudden I found myself in retail. And back then the Macy's executive training program was pretty reputable. And, I went through their track. I spent a couple of years as an associate buyer and then as a manager, in one of the stores. I left there and went to one of their competitors, Emporium Capwell, and I was there for a couple of years. So my path diverged. And, I enjoyed being in business. I enjoyed being close to consumers and understanding their needs. And then I decided that I wanted to work for a really cool brand. And I think that's the point where I thought, what do I want my legacy to be? What kind of companies do I want to work for? And I decided I wanted to work for Esprit. And
How old are you at this point where you're having these considerations, like where do I take these skills and where do they fit? How old would you say you were at this point?
mid 20s.
Okay.
So I got a job at Esprit, mostly in operations and finance. And I spent about 7 years there. Super cool company. I mean, the people that worked there were the brand. So, it was a young, hip, fun, kind of irreverent lifestyle. and there was always cool stuff to do. Esprit was an amazing company. They offered all kinds of crazy benefits. So I spent 7 years there, which was kind of like my business school, at least kind of like my finance piece of it. And again, decided I wanted to work for another cool company, and I moved over to Levi Strauss, and I spent a couple of years there. I'm going to date myself. I was on the team that launched the Dockers brand way back when, before business casual was actually a thing. And we positioned Dockers behind that. That was my move into marketing at that point. So I started working in marketing and branding. And then I got a call from Disney out of the blue through a recruiter. And I was offered a job to head up sales and marketing for Disney consumer products. So that's all the stuff you see sold everywhere except the parks and the Disney stores. So Walmart to Dick's Sporting Goods to Macy's, or pretty much anywhere, mom and pop shops, anything that you could put one of the Disney franchises on, one of the characters, or Winnie the Pooh or Toy Story. That was an amazing run. I was there for 5 years. Before I left, I was VP of global sales and marketing. So I was traveling around the world, and we were printing money because licensees were willing to pay ridiculous amounts of money just to have the license, whether or not they were actually building a profitable business with Disney.
Yeah. Well, hold on. I want to pause for a second here, because you just covered a few things that I want to make sure that we expand on, because as you're telling the story, and I knew some of the things, but we need to go deeper into some of this. The fact that you were in psychology and business, and your first interaction. Let's even go back to Macy's, and you mentioned that training system. Was there anything from that point that you really took from that experience that you were like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I want to do? Or were there any things, were there any things that you're like, this is what I like, this is what I don't like? Like, what was that first experience like?
One of the things that I learned there that has stayed with me throughout my career is the value of business analytics and using data to make smart decisions. So back then, I don't even think we were using Excel spreadsheets. We were probably doing stuff manually, but just the whole idea, which was fairly novel, of learning about, what was selling, where it was selling, who it was selling to, at what times, and understanding that that's really a core piece of information. If you're going to be in business, you got to know what your customer wants, and you got to understand how your products or services are doing. And that has stuck with me throughout my career, as that's evolved into, crazy different technologies and software tools, and now I just ask, an LLM and it tells me. But that stuck with me through all of the work that I've done.
And having that foundational knowledge and understanding of, the base of psychology, and then the business and the data, like that's such a wonderful foundation to have as you go into any business, really. So that's cool to hear you mention that. And so with Esprit, you brought up some of the things, like it was cool, it's fun. And so I'm sure there's things about that diverged from, maybe Macy's was a little more buttoned up, and no pun intended. I know they're closed, but but a little more buttoned up. And then you're like, okay, so they have this part of it, right? And that's fun. And so taking that to the next step, and this is something I was really excited about talking to you about, because I know people that love working for Disney and with Disney, and about what that corporate experience is like. That's why I was like, hey, let's pause here. I want to cover those things, but tell me about that experience, from the beginning, and like the first introduction and the things that you learned there.
Sure. So, to fill in the blank about Esprit, that's where I moved from like finance and operations to understanding what it meant to build and manage a brand. Because there was nothing more important at Esprit than the brand and the image. Even if the product sucked, even if it wasn't selling, it was all about the brand. And that migrated through everything that everybody did there. So that was very fertile training ground for understanding the power of brand. So, I had the psychology piece from school. I then got kind of the business foundation and understanding analytics and, how to understand your customer and what they're buying and what they want. And then I moved into the branded side of it, which, was kind of devoid of a lot of the analytics. And the business side, that was just about, making sure that everything was cohesive and telling the same story. And that's when I then moved to Levi Strauss, and then continued, working on a brand and launching Dockers. Moving ahead to Disney's a really interesting place. I don't know that there's another studio, certainly when I was there, which was in the late 90s, that spent as much time and energy and commitment to excellence. Everything that they do at Disney, whether you're talking about how a film is made, whether you're talking about a product, whether you're talking about an experience at one of the parks, and, if that's the hotel you're staying in, if it's the bus that you're taking from the airport to the park, it's just everything is optimized and strategically geared towards giving you a full-fledged immersive experience with Disney. And that was amazing, being a part of that. And even though I was on the product side rather than the studio side, because we were creating and marketing products based on the films and based on the different franchises, whether they were, on TV or they were movies or they were characters in the park, we were always looking at what the creative was coming down the pike. So if it was a new film, we would see very, very early pencil sketches of the film. You remember those books where you would, you would turn the pages, and the little character would move, because it would be drawn a little bit differently. So we would see it from there, through color, through, still shots, through animation, to final, adding the soundtrack, the music, the artists that sang in those movies. So that was really cool, being a part of that and contributing to that brand or franchise by honoring who it was or who the character was or what the message was. I mean, when they made films, even in the animated films, like when they made Lion King, they took a crew of like 50 people and moved to Africa for 6 months. So everything they did and everything that they created in animation was true to the environment and true to, even the way the animals moved and migrated and the people there. And they do that still, and they've done it for all their other animated films to make sure that they were really being true to the culture there.
That commitment to excellence and how that permeates up and down the chain is something that I've heard and you experience in the final product. So
Mm-hmm.
do you feel, well, I don't know to tell you how you feel or ask you to try to pigeonhole you how you feel, but like how soon when you come into that type of environment do you feel it? Is it right away? Is it like you come into the door and you're like, oh, I need to step up my game?
As an employee?
Yeah, as a part of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Even their onboarding process, which takes a couple of weeks outside of your whatever business unit you're in, one of the things that you have to do as an executive there is you have to experience being a walking character. So at the parks, there's characters that are walking around. You might not notice it, but they don't speak. And it is a real live person in there. And those people are highly trained, again, so they understand and know to their bone who that character is, how they move, how they interact with people, with guests, with other characters. So as an executive, you go down to the park with, a group of 10 or 12 other execs, and each of you becomes one of those walking characters. So you're putting on that entire suit. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that goes on underneath it. And then every character has a handler. So there's a person that's walking with you because it's hard to see and move around. And it's the most powerful experience. Half of the people that do it wind up in tears because the kids that come up to you think you're it. Like you are you are the real character. Like you're the one they see on TV or in a film or in a book or, in a toy that they play with. And they come up to you and, 9 times out of 10, it's, it's love and it's joy and it's excitement. Every once in a while, if you happen to be a villain, they might come up and kick you. I luckily didn't have to be a villain. The first time I did it, I was Mustafa, not Mustafa. I was the witch doctor from Lion King. But it was an amazing experience, and something that tells you that like this is the commitment that the company makes to the brand.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm glad I asked. It was something I wondered, because when I hear about all the things and the training and what it means to be a part of that, I'm always wondering, like, it has to be, because if it's commitment to excellence all the way through, it's probably from the very start, from the onboarding, from the pamphlet that you get, like it's right on brand. And so I didn't want to jump over Levi Strauss, and I know and I want to talk about what you currently do, but talking about this journey, like these are big things that you've been able to accomplish, and I'd love to see how the journey leads you to the product that the service and the product that you're delivering today. So is there anything you want to fill in before we start talking about the books and AI? Again, I don't want to jump around too much, but I want to talk about AI and efficiencies. But yeah, I want to make sure that you have an open stage to share.
So there was one more corporate tenure that I should mention, and that was at ESPN in New York. So I spent about 5 years in their enterprises group launching X Games. So building out, what's now is, $1 billion action sports industry, working on the events, working on consumer products, working on, all kinds of strategic partnerships, whether it was credit cards or bank accounts or, t-shirts and skateboards. So that, again, was another experience working with the brand and building products and franchises. And as I look through my past, the common thread in all of it has always been around building new things, launching new things, and having a certain kind of commitment to creativity. Because all these things, they were either licensed businesses or they were new businesses like Dockers. At Esprit, we were always launching new products and services and, reimagining how we'd communicate with our customers. And, and culminating at Disney and then ESPN, creativity was paramount. You couldn't just be smart or effective. You also had to be creative, and you had to be pushing the boundaries. It was an expectation, which was great, because I fed off that and I enjoyed it. And, it was a competitive environment, lots of, really tough people, but, kept me on my toes. And, that's what led me to consulting and, moving out and, opening my own business, was then being able to help other people build their businesses.
I want to expand on the creativity part, because I feel like, especially me working in commercial real estate and working for some, even before commercial real estate, but working pretty large institutions, like creativity, I didn't feel like was valued all the time. It's more of, no, just do the job. And then me as a person, I was like, I like to do different things, I like to do this and that. So how wonderful an experience it must have been. I know it's probably not all perfect, but to work for these organizations where it's not only, desired, it's expected, like you need to. And so when you're working in those types of environments, were there, how did they foster that? How did they promote that and ask that of you?
It's a great question. And the way that they fostered the commitment to creativity in most meetings was to challenge the status quo. So if you were presenting a new idea, a new vision, a new brand, a new product, people around you were encouraged to ask questions to push you, what if you were to think about it in a different way? Or, we know that our competitors are already doing that in their space. How do we do it differently? How do we differentiate ourselves? Which has also been something that I've taken with me throughout my career and with the work that I do with other companies, is how are you different and how do you do what you do better than anybody else? And until you can figure out what that is, you're going to struggle. You're not going to have the kind of exponential growth that you want. You might, kind of move along at a slow pace, but in order to grow at an accelerated rate, you've got to be doing something that is interesting, new, differentiated, and powerful.
When you started your own business and you started consulting for doing all these firms, walk me through your foundation, and maybe this leads into your first book. Where are those priorities? Like how does it work when you come in and consulting? Like what do you look at first, and just walk us through the process?
So I usually come into organizations when they've hit the ceiling. They're at a point where, they've stagnated and people are frustrated. They're trying to grow. They've tried a lot of different new products or services. They're not profitable. It's, sucking up cash flow. People aren't doing what they want them to do. People aren't listening. People aren't paying attention, which most of the time means that the leader is not doing a good job of managing those people. It's not the people themselves. And they just don't know how to get to that next level and, how to make that hockey stick happen. So the first thing that I do with them, and it's going to sound pretty simplistic, but we sit down. Sometimes it's an owner, manager, partner. Sometimes it's a leadership team. And we put together an issues list. So it's, no idea is a bad idea. Doesn't matter how big, doesn't matter how small. Let's put every single issue we can think of, up on the board. And it's one of the ways to get everybody in that meeting to just get all of the stuff, out in the open. And it doesn't matter what it is. People might not even know if it's, just something that's particular to your area or department. The other thing that happens is people say something and it's something that nobody else wanted to say or felt it was uncomfortable. So I help to create that space where, it's okay to say those kinds of things. So we just get it all out. And then what I start doing through a variety of different, exercises, assessments, audits, is to look at the different foundational aspects of their organization. So what do I mean by that? One of the biggest ones is really understanding the purpose and the mission of the company and understanding their value system, which then feeds their culture. And very often in small to mid-sized companies, those things are not well articulated. They might not be implemented or be enforced in a way that's meaningful for people. So a big part in the beginning is really talking to them about, who they are, who do they want to be, what's most important to them, what's their passion, what's the difference that they want to make, and getting all of those things buttoned up and locked down in a very simple way, which is another important part of it. Businesses that have mission statements that are, 3 paragraphs long, doesn't work. No one's going to remember any of it. So we build that baseline, and that informs, who they should hire. It informs, where their products and services go. It informs who the customers are that they want to serve. And it really becomes kind of the litmus test for most of the things that we do. And then I start looking at the various functional areas of the company. So whether it's sales, marketing, finance, product development. And in some cases, they need help in every area. And in some cases, it might be just, 1 or 2 areas.
And you find that out in the discovery phase when you're asking these questions and having people put those things on the board. And for your work and most what you've seen so far, like where are some of the biggest weaknesses that the company, or I hate to say weaknesses, I know there's probably a better word, the challenges that people have? Like where are the common, what's the common denominator?
It's a great question, and I'll give you a couple of them. The first one is understanding the difference between a visionary and an operator or an integrator. So a visionary, which is typically the founder or CEO, they are out in the marketplace. They're looking at ideas. They're talking to people. They're making sure that their customers and clients are getting what they need. They're thinking up new ideas and new products all the time, new services, always generating ideas, which you need for the lifeblood of the company and the brand. That said, they're horrible about managing people and prioritizing things. And you do need this other person, which is making sure that all the stuff that needs to get done is getting done and that they're hitting all of their goals and that people have the resources that they need. And oftentimes in a small to medium-sized company, you have one person that's trying to do both of those roles and it doesn't work. And you find a couple of different situations. One is, that visionary side comes into a meeting and, dumps 10 new ideas on everybody. And all they wanted to do was talk about what's on their plate right now and how to get it done. And all of a sudden there's 10 new things and there's new directions. And, it's so disruptive. It's really hard to manage a solid business and move it forward. So that's one kind of management component that I come across all the time. And once I can get them to see the difference in those two roles and identify who does which one better, things become really clear really fast. So that's one component that I come across a lot of the time. Another one in terms of people is making sure that your people pass 2 tests. One of them is that they're a good culture fit. And the other one is that they're a good fit for their function and for their job. and they're very different things. So you might have a head of sales that's just blowing through all their numbers, just crushing it, but they don't embrace the culture of the company. And what happens is they're slowly just tearing away at it. And nobody wants to fire the head of the sales because he's bringing in all the revenue. But what they don't realize is that that person is also tearing away at the fabric of the company and does a lot more damage in the long term. So that's a big one. And helping companies to kind of go through that process and figure out which people need to go and which people need to stay. Another one that I find is, and again, this is the size of the business, is understanding that you're not the customer. I mean, maybe you are, but a lot of the time you're not. And, people make decisions based on anecdotal data and their own preference because they think they're the customer or that they know the customer well enough. And oftentimes it's because there isn't enough data, there isn't enough focus, and there isn't a really deep understanding of who your customer is and what they want and, and what makes them happy and, what kind of products or services you want to give them.
As you're discussing these things and laying them out, and this all makes perfect sense. I would imagine, especially when you're coming into an organization and let's say, I don't want to be too specific about anything because I'm really not talking about it, but it's something that I've seen. It's not uncommon that the things that people are doing and the mistakes, putting air quotes up here, that they're making, sometimes it's not malicious. Like they're not doing it on purpose, even if it's the culture fit. Like sometimes they're just like, that's just how I do things. And so how do you work through that when leadership is saying like, well, these are actually our goals, and you're finding out, well, actually based on what you said, these are your goals. Mm-hmm. You're like, am I right? And then you're like, okay, these are your strengths, and you place them. But how hard is it? And I know every situation is different, but how hard is it to really navigate that where you're like, I'm just working with what what I'm seeing and what you're telling me. So like, I'm not saying you're a bad person, but like you're the best fit to do this part of the role. Is that a challenge for you?
It's always a challenge. Sometimes a big one, sometimes not as big. It really depends on the mindset of leadership. And, if I'm coming in to work with them, there's at least a substantial appetite for potential change and transformation.
Yeah. So they're open to the suggestions and these thoughts and the direction. That makes sense.
And if they're not, and I do my best to try and discover this early on. And if they're not interested in the change and the transformation and the difficult parts of it, there's no reason for me to be there because I'm not going to be able to help them.
Yeah, no, that's great. So what led you to write the first book? Was it, and let's talk about your first book. And I believe it was your first one, right? Because there's two books. The first one was Scaling Your Business, right? Yep, there you go, holding up the book. So was it all these lessons that and I'll include your books in the show notes as well. But like, what was that impetus for you to say, I'm going to put this down and I can put this in something that people can read and actually take a practical guide to doing this?
Well, not everybody can afford a consultant to work with them on these kinds of things. So I wanted to create a way for people with smaller budgets to do it on their own. And, none of it is that difficult. A lot of it can actually be quite simple. It's really about having, the rigor and the stick-to-itiveness to do it, to identify it, to figure out the solution, and then implement it and, and stick with it. And a lot of that has to do with management and people. But once you get the people side of it right, it's a lot easier to start embracing change and transformation.
Yeah. And so through that, and then I want to jump to the AI stuff in a minute. So I want to make sure we cover all this because I
Of
love this stuff.
course.
But went through the process of writing a book because I've talked to to several other authors, and they always like, yeah, I'm gonna write a book, and then they go through it and they're like, wow, that was way harder than I thought, which makes sense. What was that process like? How long did it take? Like, what were some challenges that you faced, and like, what was that whole experience like?
The first one took 6 months.
Oh, really? Oh, that's great.
And I have never written fiction, so I would imagine that's a very different kind of journey because there's an emotional component to it. There's storytelling. There's a level of creativity and dynamism that you try to do some of that in a business book, but the business book writing it's a little bit drier. It's a little bit more structured. So, for me, I was able to look at all the different things that I was doing with my clients. And the hardest piece was organizing it. So taking all the information and all the data and organizing in a way that made it easy for people to read and to pick up. Because when I'm doing this kind of stuff, I've got all kinds of tools and experiences and ideas in my brain, and I'm pulling on all those different things when I'm working with clients. But if somebody's going to pick up a book and do it on their own, it's got to read in a way that makes sense and that builds. So that was the biggest hurdle, really. And once everything got organized and I got everything in there, then another big piece of it was editing it down so stuff made sense.
Yeah, and that's what I've heard from most people, like the editing part of it, and they're like, but maybe it's the editor they use. I don't know, maybe. But now, a practical guide to using AI in your small business.
Yep.
I'm sorry it took us 40 minutes to get here to this part
Oh my
because I know
God.
it's what we originally, really started to vibe off of when we first met. But I am just blown away every day by artificial intelligence and the way you can use it. And there's always some way to. So talk me through and walk me through your introduction to AI and your initial working with it, and then how that turned into this is how small businesses can use it right now.
You're absolutely right. It's changing at a breakneck speed. Uh, and if you let it, it'll have your head spinning. My initial work with AI was when, ChatGPT became available. Was that 2.5 years ago? But back then it was still so nascent, and, who knew things like prompt engineering? Like, what does that mean? Like how you write prompts, and, nobody really knew how fast it would learn and how sophisticated and intelligent it would get so quickly. And then if you think about what's been happening just in the last 6 months, the pace of change and the pace of growth and development is, it's sonic. It's crazy. Um, it's also very exciting. It's an extremely exciting time, and AI is going to change almost everything about our lives. Depends on who you talk to. When that big change is coming, is that a year, 2 years, five? Maybe at the end of the decade or the century. The way I've approached AI and the way that I use it in small businesses is I want people in the organization to level up their work. And what I mean by that is I want them to be able to work on the higher value projects. And if they're in a sales or service role, they're actually able to spend more time having human connections with real people. If they're in a product role, they're able to spend more time creating better and newer products. Same thing with marketing. Same thing with operations. So my goal is to get them to take all of the repetitive, mundane, time-sucking tasks and automate them intelligently. So what they wind up doing is a much, much higher level of work. They're adding more value to the company. They're providing more value to their customers and to their clients. And, they're not spending a lot of time scheduling meetings, doing recaps, delegating things, you know, just mundane stuff.
So in your research and what you're doing, because again, you're saying small business, and then you're saying, you're also mentioning services and goods. What are some of the are there any tools specifically? I know there's ChatGPT, the big one out there, but are there any specific tools that you highlight or that you've pegged for? These are some of the things that you can use for productivity.
I have, and on my website, I have a directory of over 250 different tools, and I'll give you the links. You can put it in the notes here. There's more than I could possibly mention.
Yeah.
And they're moving around in terms of who's better. I'll tell you, there's one product called Gamma, GAMMA, that's gotten pretty popular recently. I needed to do a presentation, and I literally went in and I just wrote in plain English, in the prompt, what I wanted, who it was for, some key details, and it created an 8-page PowerPoint presentation, beautiful visuals, really, really well done, well branded, in 5 minutes.
Wow. That's amazing. And so with that, and is there a place there that you can, let's say, put your logo in there, your brand details, or just describe them, or can you drop actual JPEGs or PNG? Well, I don't think I've ever said this out loud. Is it called a ping or a PNG? What?
PNG?
Yeah.
It's an
All right,
image
just
file.
PNG.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, I could you just drop those in there and it'll add them to the presentation as well?
Sure.
I love it. No, that's cool.
You can put in your brand colors. I mean, it's mind-boggling how well it does it. And then the thing is too, and I think this is where a lot of people miss out on the power of AI, and that is that it's an iterative process. So you ask it to do something, it does it for you. It shows you what it's done, whether it's explaining something or it's an image or a presentation. And there's stuff you don't like about it, and you're like, I didn't really get it that well. You just go right back in and say, this is good, this is good, this is bad, this didn't work, and here's why. Do it again. And you just keep iterating with everything that you do. If you're asking it a question, and that's how AI works. It's intelligent, it learns. And I think that's where a lot of people miss out. They think, oh, ChatGPT, I tried it. I hear this all the time. I tried it. It was okay. I'm like, really? What did you ask it to do? And they'll tell me, and then they'll complain about the answer. And I'll say, well, once it gave you that answer, did you ask it why or where it got it from? Or did you challenge it? Did you tell it that you knew it to be different? And the answer is always no. And I'll say, well, why not? I mean, it's AI, it's artificial intelligence. So you can actually have a dialogue with it. Like, pretend that that's somebody sitting across the desk from you. They might not be as smart as you. They might not have your education. They might not be a subject matter expert, but have that conversation and see what happens.
Yeah, and they will be quickly. That person will be. Yeah.
And that's the beauty of AI. I mean, automation has been around for a long time. But automation is always based on, if then, if this, then that. So within basic automation, you're predetermining the choices and the decisions and the outcomes. So you've already figured out what those are. So they're limited. But if you have automation and you put AI into it and you give AI some leeway to make decisions, it will then become it does become much more dynamic. It also keeps learning. So you're taking an automation, but people worry that it's going to sound like a computer or a robot. But the reality is, if you tell it the personality you want it to use and the way you want it to talk to people, and you can literally just tell it, then what it's going to do is figure out how to do that, and then how to do that so it's unique and interesting and personal to everybody that it's connected to. And it can do that because, it can go out in a millisecond and read somebody's LinkedIn profile. It can go out in a millisecond and go find articles that person's written. It can go look at their Facebook account. So it can understand who that person is, how they talk, what's important to them. So when they interact with them, even if it's just scheduling a meeting, there's a certain kind of familiarity that they can provide. And I think that's where a lot of people miss out on what AI can do.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. And as somebody I've been working in AI for a few years now, and I use it for just about everything that I do, not just business but personal. I use it for a lot of things. And when I went to an AI commercial real estate technology conference, and I was there. And one of the cool things was that commercial real estate is pretty conservative, risk averse industry. And so but being at these conferences when there's people that are, this is what they do, like, and they're into technology and into AI. And so being around that, I won't say like, oh, I found my tribe, but like kind of like these are all the people in the industry that are trying to do things faster and better and being creative. And a lot of times in these tools, there's no one tool that does it all. I mean, ChatGPT can take you far, but I found different tools to do different things. And like for prospecting, I use one tool, and for, outreach, I use a different AI integration. And then for like putting together proposals, I use a different one. And now I'm going to be using Gamma pretty soon to help with the presentations as well. But I use a different tool for all of these things. And it's made my life so much easier and better. And in the end, it helps my team, it helps my clients, it helps my partner, it helps everybody in the process. And as more people become acclimated to it and learn how to use it and work with it and iterate, and I don't know, the future this is so much fun. It's so much fun. And that's why I thought like what you're doing and how you're doing it, and because sometimes I don't know, I can't like, you can lead a horse to the water, right? But like the fact that you are teaching people and you're consulting people on how to do it, I think it's very needed, and it's going to keep changing. So there'll always be more opportunity.
Yep. And it's I find it fascinating and fun, and with all the stuff going on politically and what's probably going to happen to our economy in the short term, being in and around AI where things are moving and growing, and there's just a ridiculous amount of money being invested. I feel like what I'm doing now is pretty recession proof.
Yeah, well, on that note, I also think like, especially if you start thinking about the investment and like you see the numbers and you're like, well, okay, couldn't we like hold on to like half of that investment and just like solve hunger or like homelessness first?
Of course.
Or we can use AI to solve those things, but like it's probably not going to go there. But anyway, well, I guess we'll figure it out.
100%.
So Eric, thank you very much for your time today. And again, I'll share your contact information and the notes, the links to the book, and also the did you call it a glossary of all the different tools, the AI tools?
Yeah, it's an AI tools directory.
Okay, directory. So I'll share all that. But before we take off, and again, thank you for your time. Is there
Sure.
anything you want to parting notes for the audience and the listeners and the viewers?
What I would say to everybody is if you haven't tried using AI, you need to. And even if it's going to ChatGPT and just asking it some questions and playing around with it, you need to understand what it is and how it works because it's going to permeate every aspect of our lives. You can hate it. You can think it's bad. However you feel about it, you need to take some time and really understand what it is. That would be my sage advice.
Yeah, and poignant sage advice. And I know it's not the same exact thing, but I imagine like when the internet first came out and people were like, or let's,
Yep.
people were like, no, I'm not sending an email. Like I'd rather write a letter. And it's like letters are great and all that stuff. But like if you're okay, let's say or Excel. Like someone's like, no, I'm not using Excel like an accountant. Like I'm just going to use this abacus or whatever like chart. Like I'm gonna do that. It's like all right. I mean, go ahead, but like everybody else is going to be doing this, and good luck. Yeah.
I also think, from a kind of socio-political standpoint, thinking about AI as a technology is a mistake.
Ooh. Okay.
You need to be
Go on.
thinking about AI as, um, a tectonic shift in every aspect, in healthcare, in feeding people who don't have enough to eat, in uh, um, finding finding cures for diseases, distributing wealth more equitably. I mean, you name it. There's there's a place for it in all of that. And if you think about it as a technology, as this thing over there, like the internet, like you could decide not to use a computer. You could decide to never go online, and you could, live a very normal, happy life. You could decide not to have a mobile phone and only to have a landline. But AI is much, much more than a technology. It's something that is going to permeate everything. And hopefully in a lot of good ways. There'll be some not so good ways. Um, there's going to be a huge shift in the labor force, and we need to figure out how that's going to work. But understanding it, having some idea about what it is, I think is important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Eric, thank you so much.
You're
Eric
welcome.
Goldman, thank you.
Take care. Great talking to you, Dustin.
Take care.
Bye.